Good evening. It's a pleasure being here with you tonight, although virtually. And I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation to speak on the topic of the Sephardi Mizrahi Experience series. Today's topic is going to be Spanish and Eastern Jewry in history and today. We will start by defining the terms Sephardi and Mizrahi, comment on the antiquity of the Sephardi Mizrahi diaspora, evoke the golden age and its decline, talk about modern times, and conclude. Originally, the term Sephardi was attributed to the Jews expelled from Spain and Portugal. The majority of Jews in Portugal came from Spain in 1492, but were subjugated to the Inquisition 4 years later. In 1492, Sephardic Jews were welcomed by the kings of Morocco, Naples, and the Ottoman Sultan. They settled on the Mediterranean shores and in the Balkans from Greece to Yugoslavia and Bulgaria. They moved clandestinely to Holland and were permitted to settle in England under Cromwell in the 17th century. However, this definition of Sephardi was enlarged to include all the Jews who were influenced by Sephardi culture, including Jews of the Middle East, as well as the Judeo-Greek community of the Romaniot. Maimonides corresponded with the remote Jews of Yemen, and his work has been studied there. Even in Iran, the liturgy included Sephardic tunes, and moreover, any communities in Europe adopted the Nosach Sfard prayer book. Many definitions of Sephardim have been proposed, mainly after the massive immigration of Jews to Israel. Sephardi meant non-Ashkenazi or non-European, which is wrong. Mizrahi referred to Oriental Jews, that is a Jewish community of the Middle East, and often the western part of the Mediterranean shore. For the purpose of this talk, Sephardi refers to Jews in the Mediterranean countries, and Mizrahi refers to Jews in the Middle East mainly. Sephardim constitute a very diverse group of Jews. The photomontage that follows is a work of Max Benchetrit and depicts traditional Sephardic communities in Morocco, in Central Asia, Iraq, Kurdistan, Uzbekistan, in Europe, Spain, Italy, France, England, also Holland, Bulgaria, and in America, the first Jews who settled in America were Spanish Portuguese Jews, both in the United States and Canada, and also in Brazil. In India, part of the community in India was originally from Iraq, and many Jews in Africa identify themselves to Judaism and most of the time to Sephardim, and this includes the Abu Daya in Uganda and the Beta Israel, known as the Falasha of Ethiopia, and more. On the right, you can see Jews of Yemen, who are a very, very remote community who has its own tradition and folklore, very distinct one. And on the left, you can see a person with double identity. Those are Jews who had to convert to stay alive and converted either to Christianity, either to Islam, staying Jewish at home and outside being perfect Christians or perfect Muslims. But with the years and with the generations, they became Christians or Muslims. Although today there are some movements, different parts of the world of Marranos, was conversos trying to get back to Judaism. Let's talk now about the antiquity of the settlements of Jews, both in the West and in the East. The term Sepharad might be related to Hesperis, which means the Occident in Greece. According to Ibn Ezra of the 12th century, Spain was known, The name Spain could refer to Hispania, which means the island of rabbits, and the name Iberia could refer to Ivrim, or Hebrews, as many Phoenician merchants settled along the Mediterranean coast and the Atlantic coast too, including Spain, obviously. Since the time of King Solomon, Israelites took part of some of the Phoenician expeditions. Many civilizations ruled the Orient and invaded the land of Israel. First, Babylonia in the time of Hammurabi, that goes almost 2,000 years before the Common Era. You had also a huge competition between two superpowers, the Hittites and Egypt. Then you have Assyrian hegemony, followed by Babylonian one, followed by the Persian one, the Greek one, the Roman one. Then you have Byzantium, which kept fighting all the time with Persia. And you had the Arab invasion with the Crusaders parenthesis. Then you have the Ottoman rule in the Middle East and part of North Africa. And you had the British Mandate from 1917 until 1948. And today is the State of Israel. In 721 BC, the Assyrians expelled the 10 tribes of Israel, which then settled mainly in Asia. The Assyrian siege can be viewed in gigantic carved stone panels in the British Museum, but there are many legends as well as Talmudic references that include North Africa among the places to which Jews were expelled. In 586, the Kingdom of Judah, which regrouped the last two tribes of Israel, was conquered by the Babylonians, and the exile of Babylonian Jews followed. The Museum of Bible Lands in Jerusalem had a collection of writings of the year 572 BCE referring to the Jews of Babylon. Note that both the Assyrian exile of the Jews and the Babylonian exile of the Jews, there are also legends as well as Talmudic references that include North Africa among the places to which Jews were expelled. After King Cyrus of Persia defeated the Babylonians, Jews were allowed to settle in Israel. During the Greek period, thousands of Jews settled in the south of Egypt, in Elephantine, near Aswan of today, and mainly in Libya. The Roman Empire covered a large part of the known world, but its expansion in the east was limited due to the incessant wars against the Parthians, which are the Parthumim of Megillat Esther. After the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70, Jews were sold as slaves, and according to Flavius Josephus, 30,000 Jews were sold as slaves in Carthage alone. Carthage is in Tunisia of today. Following the Jewish revolt of 115 and the harsh Roman repression that followed, Jews fled Libya and settled in the south of Morocco, far from the Limes, the Roman Limes, as north of Morocco was incorporated to the Roman Empire. This would explain the high concentration of Jews in the south of Morocco. There is archaeological evidence of the presence of Jews in Morocco. This is found in the form of tombstones. You have one in Volubilis, which is near Meknes in Morocco, and a tombstone of the 3rd century, written in Hebrew, Matruna Bat Rabbi Yehuda Noach. And in Saleh, near Rabat, the capital of today, you have an inscription in Greek, so it says Marenos, Ptolemeos, Judeos, and probably during the Roman times, some Jews still spoke Greek. It is in Babylonia that the main corpus of the Talmud, which is the codification of the oral Jewish law, was compiled. Sura and Pombedita were very famous Jewish learning centers. Later on, Kairouan in Tunisia and Fez in Morocco were in contact with the Babylonian academies. The Roman Empire was divided in two. The capital of these empires were Rome in the west and Constantinople in the east. Invasions of Nordic tribes, mainly Orthogoths, Visigoths, and later on Vandals, weakened the Roman Empire. East of Byzantium, the Persian Empire of the Sassanids ruled over Iraq. Byzantium and Persia were constantly at war. Weakened by these wars, they demonstrated a relatively mild opposition to the Arab invasion. Arab invasion in the Middle East was swift. In contrast, in the Maghreb, Arab invasion was opposed by the Berbers led by a Jewish queen of Al-Kahena, and it lasted at least 30 years. The Golden Age. Oh, by the way, the Arabs continued to France, and they were stopped in the Battle of Poitiers in France. It's a famous battle considered to be a victory of the Franks, although the defeat is to be attributed more to the infighting between Berbers and Arabs. But this stopped the Arab invasion, and a new civilization was about to be born in Spain. In Spain, the Moorish dynasties became independent from the Arab dynasties, which ruled successively in Damascus, in Baghdad, and in Cairo. Gradually, the Christian kingdoms of Spain united, while the Moorish kingdoms in the south divided to smaller kingdoms. The Reconquista was a gradual expansion of Christian Spain until the defeat of the Moorish kingdom of Granada in 1492. The Golden Age. A brilliant civilization would emerge in two centers, Baghdad in Iraq and Cordoba in Spain. Translations of the Greek authors and scientific interest led to remarkable achievements in arithmetic, geometry, optics, astronomy, which went together with astrology, medicine, physics, metaphysics, philosophy, exegesis, and jurisprudence. Development in this area was very significant, and the Jewish contribution to the Golden Age was most important. Here are some examples. Abul Qasis, it's considered to be the father of modern surgery. He performed surgeries under inhaled anesthesia and introduced plaster casts to treat fracture and managed surgical instruments. He pioneered pharmacology with the preparation of medicine by sublimation and distillation. Al-Razi and Ibn Sina were among the most famous physicians in the East. Ibn Sina's canon of medicine was used in Europe until 1650. Arab advances in medicine were drastically outnumbered those in Europe. Between the years of 800 and 1300, there were more than 70 authors of Arab medical works. By way of comparison, the University of Paris had 9 volumes of medicine at the end of the 14th century. Algebra and arithmetic were advanced, very advanced. In fact, the word algebra comes from the Arabic word jabr, which means reconciliating the missing part, the unknown. And the mathematically known variable, which we usually call x in mathematics, derives from shay'in, meaning something, as the Spaniards could not write the sound sh. Interest in philosophy was quintessential. Trying to harmonize faith and reason was a focal point of interest among Muslims and Jews alike since the 9th century. Look at some of the titled works: Incoherence of the Philosophers, stating that faith should overcome reason, and Incoherence of the Philosophers. Among the many authors and philosophers, Jewish Ibn Pakuda and Ibn Arabi, in the Muslim part, developed the concept of spiritual perfection, which led in the Muslim part to Sufism, and later on we'll see the birth of the Kabbalah in Spain. There were great philosophers in Spain, mainly, called Averroes, Maimonides, and Thomas Aquinas. Averroes said, if the scriptures contradict reason, there is room for interpretation, which is a very strong statement for the period. Maimonides says, reason is essential for acquiring moral values. Thomas Aquinas later on said, if we solve the problem of the faith only by the way of authority, we would certainly know the truth, but in an empty head. Islamic art, architecture, and calligraphy also excelled. You have here the interior of the Mosquita of Cordoba, one of the ceilings of the Alhambra Palace in Granada. You have the Omar Mosque in Jerusalem, and also another mosque in Turkey, an astrolabe from Persia, and many more. Note that the golden age of Baghdad in the east and Cordoba in the west was relatively short period of history. In the Muslim world, Jews and Christians were dhimmis, i.e. they have diminished rights, were submitted to special taxes and humiliations. The application of the statute of dhimmi was sometimes very strict, sometimes subtle, depending on the ruler. In the West, Inquisition made life extremely uncomfortable for Jews who ended up being exiled from Spain in 1492. The discovery of America made Europe much less dependent on the trade through Arab countries of cotton, spices, perfumes, and so on. And the Renaissance movement opened new horizons to Western society. While in the East, the Caliphate was weakened by the Seljuk invasions and mainly by the Mongols. It is said that the Mongols killed close to 800,000 residents of Baghdad in the year 1280. Creativity in the Muslim world practically ceased, and the illusion of Muslim supremacy persisted. During the lethargy period in the Arab countries, the condition of dhimmi of the Jews, i.e. vexations and diminished rights, was often applied harshly. The Ottomans kept pressuring the Byzantium Empire until the capture of the legendary Constantinople in 1453. The Ottoman Empire extended until Algeria and menaced Vienna in 1683. Meanwhile, Iraq, which was still an important Jewish center, was ruled by the Persians. However, the Ottomans and the Persians fought constantly, and eventually Iraq fell in the hands of the Ottomans. Modern times. The French Revolution was a landmark for the emancipation of the Jews in Europe. The network of schools established by l'Alliance Israélite Universelle in North Africa and the Middle East transformed the Jewish societies in these countries. This is the first Alliance class in Morocco, in the city of Tétouan in 1862. And 2 years later, there was a new school opening in Baghdad. With the spread of colonialism, the shock of the encounter of Islamic countries with the colonial powers was brutal, as Islamic countries still believed they were dominating science, technology, and the military. France and England ruled the world, and the Ottoman Empire was dismantled and divided between the French and English, and also Italy in the case of Libya. Spain got pieces of Morocco in the north and the south. In the 20th century, Sephardi communities were gradually westernized, yet some Jews lived in conditions reminiscent of biblical times, for example, in the Atlas, in the Kurdistan, in Yemen, and many were westernized to the point that they completely adopted the Western structure, Western culture. Well, Jews in Algeria, in Syria, Lebanon, an open-air synagogue in Lebanon, in Syria, and Mogador in Morocco, and Baghdad in Iraq. The only difference between Sephardim and Mizrahim is that although all of them had their own vernacular language, Judeo-Arabic, Judeo-Spanish, and their variants, Mizrahim continued to use the classical Arabic language in their daily life, while Jews in North Africa adopted solely the French or the Spanish language. As for the original Sephardic diaspora, it continued thriving in North Africa, the Balkans, East Mediterranean countries, Holland, and England. It extended in the times to communities which adopted Judeo-Spanish culture or rituals, or to those communities which were influenced by it. That is why most of the time the name Sephardim referred to original Sephardim as well as Mizrahim. As previously mentioned, Westernization of Jews preceded the Westernization of Muslims in Arabo-Muslim countries. An important factor was the educational work of the network of Alliance Israélite Universelle, which began in the second part of the 19th century. Zionism and the Jews. Although the Zionist idea of return to Zion was promoted by Don Yosef Nassi in the 16th century and by Rabbi Yehuda Bibas in the first half of the 19th century, emigration on a massive scale only began after 1948. Some felt that Messianic times were approaching. Some feared the persecutions to come in their own countries. Nationalism and the Jews. Some Israeli Jews got involved in the nationalistic Arab movements. Although Jews got citizenship in 1924, this was short-lived as restrictions were imposed in 1944 and 1948. In 1950, emigration from Iraq meant loss of citizenship. As well, Jews of Egypt suffered as they were expelled and their belongings were dispossessed. In North Africa, the Arab nationalists rarely made a place to the Jews, and many Jews were concerned with the end of the French presence, the difficult times of the Dhimmi condition would return. Many measures were taken against the Jews who were subjected to violence, expulsion, discrimination, dispossession, and difficulties to emigrate. The measures taken against Jews varied from one country to another. Unknown to many is the fact that in 1947, the Arab League voted the dispossession of the Jews. The majority of Jews from Arab countries left their homeland. We see here in 1941, the pogrom called the Farhud in Iraq, the exodus of Yemenite Jews. There was the first exodus in 1881, the Iraqi exodus in 1950, Yemenite exodus of 1949. This was the burning of a Jewish department store called CIJR in Cairo in 1953. In Libya, there were pogroms in 1945 and 1967. Were Jews leaving the Atlas Mountain to go to Israel and arriving in Haifa. Were Jews from Algeria? They were French in the middle of the 19th century. They fought in the First World War. Nevertheless, they were subjugated to the anti-Semitic measures taken by the French government, which allied itself with the Nazis during the war. Those are traces of vandalism in Libya and also in Morocco, in Jewery in 1948. The boat called Pisces was carrying clandestine immigrants to Israel, and it sank in the Mediterranean, and that was a very, very dramatic moment. And since then, Morocco allowed its Jews in a semi-official manner to leave for Israel. This is Nasser. Nasser was extremely popular in the Arab world. This is in 1961. He visited Casablanca. I was standing 5 meters from him at this picture on the left. And later on, 65, there was also the Arab League meeting. So you can understand the ambiguity of the Jews who saw the triumphal reception for Nasser, who expelled all his Jews and were simply promising to finish with Israel. As you can see, for close to 851,000 Jews of 1948, there's close to maximum 3,500 Jews who stayed in the Arab countries. Also, Turkey and Iran lost the bulk of their Jewish community. Moreover, more than 160,000 Jews perished in the Holocaust. There was Jews from Greece, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Holland, and Libya. Sephardim and Mizrahim in Israel. Sephardim and Mizrahim, both of them, faced difficult times in Israel as their immigration coincided with the establishment of the state. However, these difficulties did not prevent Jews from migrating to Israel throughout the years. The original divide between Ashkenazim and Sephardim in Israel was due to many factors. Firstly, the country was ruled mostly by Jews of Eastern European extraction, and their way of operating was not well understood by Sephardim Mizrahim. Second, generally, Oriental Jews came from technologically less advanced countries, and this was sometimes misconstrued as cultural backwardness. Moreover, the socio-economic gap was widened as the German compensation to Jews victims of the Holocaust was attributed mainly to Ashkenazi Jews, and this widened the economic disparity. There were many expressions of discontent of Sephardim in Israel. There were riots in Wadi Salib in 1959, that's in Haifa. In the early 70s, there were movements of Black Panthers, decried the inequalities in the Israeli societies, and the political parties of Daesh and later on Shas, religious party Shas, aimed to defend the rights of Sephardim. Prime Minister Menachem Begin revalorized the Sephardic patrimony and welcomed the Sephardim into his Herut party. In all spectra of the arts, Sephardic revival started to flourish. You will recognize surely some of the names appearing in the next slides. Politicians, presidents, military chiefs, historians, scientists, linguists, rabbis, poets, comedians, actors and producers, astronauts, writers and philosophers, as well as singers and composers. Not to forget Nobel Prizes in physics, peace, medicine, and literature. Today, Sephardic patrimony is preserved by different institutions, Or Yehuda for Iraqi Jewry, Rehovot for the Yemenite Jewry, American Sephardic Federation, Harif programs, excellent programs regarding the Sephardic patrimony, Jewish museums in Morocco, Casa Sepharad in Spain, the virtual Amoussef Museum in Paris, and the Sephardic Festival in Montreal. The recent Abraham Accords announced a new thaw in the Middle East as the Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco established diplomatic ties with Israel. Among the many political reasons for the peace accord, these Arab countries aspired to revive the golden age of Cordoba and Baghdad, which was an era of Judeo-Muslim conviviality. Contrary to most Arab countries, Morocco is proud of its Jewish past and welcomes Israeli tourists. There are 2 Jewish museums, one in Casablanca and one in Essaouira, with the third one under construction in Fez. As well, to foster relations with Sephardic Jews, Spain and Portugal offered their citizenship to Sephardim, and many thousands of Sephardim around the world took advantage of this opportunity. In conclusion, although the evolution of Sephardi Mizrahi Jews was somehow different, there are many commonalities. The presence of Jews is established in Arabo-Muslim countries for more than 2,000 years. The golden age of both Cordoba in the west and Baghdad in the east was a great time of enlightenment, a time of great enlightenment, although it was brief in history. The discovery of America left great wealth in Europe, which started the period of Renaissance, while the Ottoman rule of the Balkans and the majority of Arab countries was very, very stagnant. During the colonial era, Jews were eager to adopt Western culture and technology. Finally, the majority of Sephardim and Mizrahim live in Israel, and a new renaissance is taking place. A common trait of Sephardi Mizrahi Jews is their approach to Judaism. Generally, there is no need to divide Jews according to their level of practice, as it happens in the Ashkenazi community, which is segmented in Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform streams. For Sephardim, it is accepted that any level of practice of Judaism is acceptable and that there is no need to shake the Orthodox tradition. Jews constitute a multilingual and multicultural society. Thank you for allowing me to present fascinating facets of the Jewish coat of many colors.
Thank you, Professor Bensoussan. That was really fascinating. But before we move any further, we will entertain questions right now, and we'll do a Q&A session, and I'll take a look at what questions we've received. One of them is, where do the Iranian Jews fall into? Like which group, Mizrahi or Sephardi?
Okay, again, to my opinion, Mizrahi is a new concept, but it's kind of wrong, because what we call Mizrahi Jews, if you look at Iraqi Jews, which are the core of Mizrahi Jews, they integrated beautifully into the Spanish-Portuguese community in London and Montreal. Sometimes Mizrahi in Israel Mid-Oriental, that means non-Occidental, non-Western. And Mizrahi Jews per se did not constitute necessarily a very different, the evolution of Sephardim in the West and in the East was very parallel in many segments. In the case of Iran, Iran was simply, fighting with the Ottomans all the time about Iraq, but it had an important Jewish community. And there were also very harsh conditions for the Jews there. But nevertheless, I remember I've been in a kibbutz picking apples, and we were exchanging, tunes of rituals, and basically the same tunes of Yom Kippur were sang in Iran as just like in Morocco. So there was an influence altogether. So they're not necessarily disconnected from the Sephardic world. They're part of the Sephardic tradition, which is very, very anchored into the Judaism tradition in general.
Okay. Please put your questions into the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you, David, my one grandfather was from Iran. I'm from India, born in Bombay. My one grandfather was from Yemen, from Yemen. He was Yemenite, and my grandmother was Baghdadi. She was from Iraq. Okay, what does that make me?
It makes you a nice person. What can I say? There's no need. I mean, today, you know, the differentiation, before that time, everybody was Jewish. Once they were in Israel, there was like a tension between some Ashkenazi and Sephardim. Like, try to explain the reasons why. But in fact, this is kind of history. It's kind of passé because things are evolving very, very positively in terms of integration, both in Israel, in Canada, and France, and elsewhere. So simply that means we are simply, you are a product of many civilizations, which somehow were, you know, we're scattered around the world, and try to keep the best of it, of each one. That's all we try to do.
Yes, I know. They both spoke Arabic.
Yeah,
both my grandparents spoke Arabic.
To the difference in North Africa, when I was a child in Morocco, we saw not one letter in Arabic in the streets, where Arabic was for the mosque. It's very different than in Baghdad and so on, when you had Jewish writers in Arabic language. It was very rare in the West.
Someone says, thanks, firstly, thank you. Can ancestry DNA able modern Jew to connect or locate their origin now?
There are many trials of DNA, and many companies want to free heritage and so on. But the problem is that to have a good DNA analysis, you need a big data number of, and some companies don't have much data, so therefore the conclusions are not as powerful as the one who have a lot of data. That's number one. Number two, I personally was enticed with 3 tests of DNA, and I got sometimes things very varied, from Armenian to Scandinavian to whatnot, and so on. But one which has a big sample of somehow made sense, coming from Western Asia, then going to Greece, Italy, and North Africa, which made sense, and sometimes through South of France too. So very easy. Now the question is, I don't think that Jews are necessarily DNA. I mean, Jewish traditions, Jewish values are not biological. We have all the ethnics, all the races, all the languages are present. So that's the way I see it. So what can we learn from this DNA? We can maybe learn something about migration of the Jews. Interestingly enough, for instance, the Kurdish population has DNA which is very close to the Jewish DNA of the Kohanim. And by the way, the DNA of Kohanim, Ashkenazi, and Sephardim is 95% the same, although they might have been in Siberia and the other one in south of Morocco. So it's very interesting, because the Kohen transmits, you know, the gene is going, the then go from father to son. So there is something, there's a lot to be learned, but it is, I would say, in the making.
Yeah.
In the making.
You know, I had read the Dr. Tudor Parfit, one of the studies they did on DNA was on the Bnei Israel community of India, and they had that particular strain that linked them to the Kohanim. And they always believed that they had no Kohens in their group. Okay. Anyway, there's another question here. Where is the main origin of the Iranian Jews, and how did they get to Iran?
Okay, number one, we know that in 586, the Babylonian took most of the population of Judah in exile to Babylon. A few years later, the Persians conquered Babylon, and therefore you have a lot of Jews also in Persia. And it's from Persia that they were allowed to go back. Where do these Jews from Persia come? I believe there must be some of the Judeans which were in Babylon who went to Persia, but it's also possible that some of the Jews of Persia are part of the 10 tribes which had been exiled by the Assyrians. And some of the Jews in Persia think they belong to the tribe of Binyamin, among others, and so on.
Okay.
But here we're getting close to another topic, which is what happened to the lost tribe of Israel.
Yeah.
Like the Pashto in Afghanistan, there's
let's talk
very,
about
very substantial proof that they in fact originating from the kingdom of Israel.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And the last question we are going to use, what issues did the Sephardic and Berber, the Amazi, Berber, Jews of North Africa confront in developing common religious practices?
Well, North Africa is very special because you have, if you look at the Moroccan language, it's a mixture of Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, Hebrew, and Berber, it's called today Amazigh language. And you have Judeo-Spanish called Haikatia, and you have people who adopted the French as language to different degrees. You have Judeo-Arabic with a big literary traditions, and you also have Judeo-Berber. I own personally a Haggadah in Judeo-Berber, which is the Berber is a language that is very, very different. It's not a Semitic language. It's not an Indo-Aryan language. We don't know where it comes from. There's a few words like the Basque, like the Finno-Hungarian language. We cannot associate it with any of the big streams. Nevertheless, the Berbers have been invaded, converted to Islam and so on, but they kept somehow their identity and their autonomy. And there is today some tension among Berbers and Arabs in North Africa. And by the way, if Spain was lost, it's mostly because of Islam between the two. So it's complex. It's a complex.
Very complex. Yeah, my grandmother used to write in and it looked partly Arabic script, but partly Hebrew. It was like, it seemed to be a mixture of the two. I don't know what the language was, but
probably Judeo-Arabic or Judeo-Persian or something like that, because in all those communities there was a special writing which looked like Rashi, but not necessarily the Rashi writing.
Correct.
And many of them, in fact, you know that from Moorish Spain, we didn't find any works in the Arabic language. The only work we find is Arabic language with Hebrew letters. And that's how we know about all the philosophers of Spain and so on. This has been kept. Another reason for that is that when the Christians conquered Spain, they burned anything which looked like Arabic.
Like Arabic, yeah. Thank you so much. Professor Bensoussan, when Alan and I came up with the title for this series of presentations, we wondered about the precise distinction between Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, and which Jewish communities came under the umbrella of Mizrahi and which ones came under the umbrella of Sephardi. Do they overlap? This evening, you have drawn a clear distinction for us between the two, and you've beautifully outlined their history, similarities, differences, and so much more. You have drawn an excellent and very clear picture of these two fascinating Jewish communities that have contributed greatly to Jewish history, culture, and religious practice. It is time, I believe, that the study of Sephardic and Mizrahi and Eastern Jewry are included as part of the formal Jewish studies curriculum in Jewish day schools and at the university level in the Jewish studies program too. And I hope they do expand those programs to include studies of these communities. Thank you for taking time from your very busy schedule to share your extensive knowledge with us today on this subject. We truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Before we close, there are two things I forgot to mention earlier, which I must include. The latest organization to join us in this series and to support us in this series is B'nai Brit Quebec, from Quebec, and we welcome their support. I also want to thank Anil Schoenberg, whom I forgot to thank, for helping us set up the technical aspects of this evening's presentation too. In spite of all our technical help, we ran into difficulties. You never know with technology. I don't trust it one little bit. But I would like to inform everyone today that our next webinar in the Sephardi Mizrahi Jewish Speaker Series will be held in October of this year, not next month, okay? We are taking a summer break and we'll be back after the high holidays in the fall. You will receive a flyer at that time and you will get information about the next in the series. Have a safe and healthy summer, everyone. We wish you a very early Shana Tova, and we pray that we will all be able to celebrate the high holidays with those near and dear to us this year. We look forward to seeing you all in October. Thank you once again for supporting this series. Shalom and bye for now.
Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Su membración, Mosea bendición.